If you think, there's no way that's me, well, it very well could be you, and if not, you definitely know multiple people that fit into this category. Imagine for a second that you can't fully read your ballot instructions, or you're having trouble understanding the double negatives and confusing wording of a referendum. How confident would you feel voting? Well, perhaps it isn't really all that hard to imagine because it's a reality for millions of American and European voters alike. In fact, around 54% of US adults read below the equivalent of a 6th grade level, and 55 million adults in Europe have literacy difficulties. In today's video, we're going to take a look at literacy data, academic research, real-world examples, and give an opportunity for you to test your own skills. And then ask, is illiteracy undermining democracy? Well, let's get started. For most of humanity, being able to read was a luxury that most of us could not afford. Literally. In Roman times, a book cost 3/4 of a camel, which was a lot. In the Victorian era, a copy of Lord Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage cost a laborer about half a week's income. Today, it's free on Kindle. But along with the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the middle class, equal rights for women and minorities, as well as the expansion of public education, reading became more affordable and attainable to the masses. In 1820, only 1 in 10 people over the age of 15 could read. Today, the corresponding global literacy rate, the share of adults aged 15 and older who can read and write, is 87%. That means more than 5 billion people can read and write today, compared to fewer than 100 million 2 centuries ago. But we're entering a new, troubling phase in literacy in the modern world. Multiple studies in multiple places seem to be showing the same thing. Reading is in trouble. Adults are reading less. Children are reading less. Teenagers are reading a lot less. Very small children are being read to less. Many are not being read to at all. Reading rates are lower among poorer children, a phenomenon known as the reading gap. But reading is down for almost everyone, everywhere in North America, Europe, and Australia. In the United States, the share of people who read for pleasure has fallen by 2/5 in 20 years, according to a study published in August of last year. And YouGov, a pollster, found that 40% of Britons had not read or listened to any books in 2024. But the thing is, it isn't just that people are reading less, though they are. It's that what is being read is changing too. Sentences are getting shorter and simpler. Research by the publication The Economist analyzed hundreds of New York Times bestsellers from the past 100 years and found that sentences in popular books have contracted by almost 1/3. And although there are many reasons for this shift, part of the problem is that despite living in a world where we have more access to more information than ever before, a growing number of us have low literacy. About 130 million adults in the United States, over half of Americans between the age of 16 and 74, have low literacy skills, according to a Gallup analysis of data from the US Department of Education. Which means that if you're an American watching this video and you think, there's no way that's me, well, it very well could be you, and if not, you definitely know multiple people that fit into this category. Because low literacy means that, yes, you can read, but what you can read and what you take away from that text is limited. A 6th grade reading level is considered the benchmark for basic literacy, which means that you can generally read and understand simple material, follow basic instructions, and identify the main ideas in a text. This, by the way, is the benchmark that 54% of Americans fall at or below. But something important happens once we start progressing to the 9th or the 12th grade reading levels. You can now understand and analyze more complex texts, move beyond simple comprehension to analyze literary elements, support claims with evidence, and understand nuance. You can also use vocabulary skills like context clues and root words to determine meaning, understand figurative language, and analyze both fiction and nonfiction for theme, purpose, and point of view. By the time you get to a 12th grade reading level, or the end of public education and the likely launching point for collegiate reading and writing, you should be able to explicitly support your analysis with specific examples from a text and extend the information from that text by relating it to your own experiences and to the world. But a disturbingly low percent of the American public actually holds this literacy level. Just 13%. So how does this stack up internationally? Well, the OECD, which is a forum for research and data collection amongst 38 countries, has been conducting regular surveys to understand that very thing. How well are adults reading and writing nowadays? To measure it, they developed a test to evaluate a wide range of literacy abilities, from basic reading and numerical calculations to complex problem solving. And here's an example that I'll put up on the screen. You can pause this video to read and make your guesses now. Ready for the answer? Here you go. If you answered 9%, you would be correct. According to the test administrators, this question represents a low difficulty level. Although you're being presented with many different numbers within the excerpt, the answer is clearly stated in the text at the end. This example, by the way, was the first of 3 items in this unit, so let's take a look at another more advanced question in the module. Again, you're welcome to pause the video to read and make your guesses now. Ready for the answer? Here you go. This question, according to the test administrators, had a moderate to high difficulty level. And in my opinion, this is for a couple of reasons. The first is that the answer isn't explicitly stated within the text. You have to be able to infer the answer based on the context and supporting evidence given, such as how the storage temperatures in the 3 scenarios, room temperature, refrigerator, and freezer, would be relative to the degrees in Celsius as it pertains to retrogradation. Furthermore, the question itself uses more advanced language and asks that the respondent rank the choices from least to most effective. So how did countries across the OECD stack up against one another on this test? Well, Finland, if you're watching this video, go ahead and give yourselves a collective pat on the back, because you ranked first in all 3 categories: literacy, numeracy, and adaptive problem-solving skills. Specifically in the literacy proficiency, Finland was followed by Japan, Sweden, Norway, and the Netherlands. Germany, where I currently live, ranked 11th, still above average across the OECD nations examined. The United States ranks 15th, followed by France, Singapore, and Austria. Now, this ranking is certainly intriguing, but it's the longitudinal aspect of this survey and the changes that have been happening over time that are the most fascinating for me personally. You see, over the past decade, the average literacy proficiency has only improved in Denmark and Finland, remaining stable or declining in all other participating countries and economies. In fact, declines in literacy and numeracy proficiency were particularly evident amongst the least educated segments of the population. This led to a widening gap in skills proficiency between highly and low educated adults in the majority of participating countries. In other words, most of the wealthy nations around the globe aren't just seeing a decline in reading, but rather a growing number of those within their own populations who are functionally illiterate. You see, as part of the test, they define 5 levels of literacy proficiency, with level 1 as the lowest and level 5 as the highest. To use the US as an example, over 1 in 5 adults have a literacy proficiency at or below level 1. Adults in this range have difficulty using or understanding print materials, and those on the higher end of this category can perform simple tasks based on the information they read, but adults below level 1 may only understand a very basic vocabulary or be functionally illiterate. And while sure, some of these 1 in 5 are immigrants in the United States, where we would expect to see English as a secondary language, but US-born adults account for 2/3 of adults with low English literacy skills. But before I illustrate how literacy translates into political knowledge and civic engagement, I want to briefly share with you a tool that I use to help protect my online communication. Proton Mail, who's sponsoring this week's video. Like many of you, much of my personal and professional life involves sending emails. Lots and lots of emails. But lately, I've been worried. Are my emails really secure? Well, it turns out that's a legitimate issue. Sending a routine email is like writing your message on an old postcard sent through hand-delivered mail. You see, the most popular email providers like Gmail, Outlook, and Yahoo scan the content of your emails and use your email address to create a detailed profile on you and profit from your data. But by protecting your emails with end-to-end and zero-access encryption with Proton Mail means that absolutely no one, not even the employees at Proton, are able to read your emails, keeping your messages safe from data breaches or surveillance, which is exactly what prompted me to make the switch. In fact, end-to-end encryption is offered across the board on all of Proton's products, as well as a no-logs policy. Plus, if you're someone who needs to send sensitive information, you can send encrypted, password-protected emails to anyone, even those who don't use Proton Mail. The recipient receives a link to access the message, which they can then unlock using a shared password. And it is super easy to make the switch. Their Easy Switch feature means that you can securely import your emails, contacts, and calendar events from other email providers into your Proton account. And once you transfer your data to Proton Mail, everything is encrypted upon arrival in your new inbox, allowing for a secure transition to a privacy-focused email service. So take control of your online experience, free from censorship and data exploitation. Sign up for Proton Mail today for free over on the link in my description, proton.me/type Ashton. And this is massively important because functional literacy, the ability to understand, evaluate, and use text in everyday life, is extremely relevant to basic civic participation. A recent study of US ballot propositions found that most are written at a reading level far above what many adults can comfortably read. The average readability was around grade 18, effectively at the completion of a bachelor's degree, creating a mismatch between language complexity and citizen ability. Florida has notoriously long ballots. In Miami-Dade County, a sample ballot for one general election ran 12 pages long, in part because voters had to wade through 11 wordy constitutional amendments. The lengthiest amendment was 640 words long. But even much shorter ballot questions can be worded in ways which intentionally confuse voters. Pause this video now to read this ballot measure from Hawaii. Confused? Yeah, most voters were too. But beyond the ballot box, civic literacy is also weak. A survey by the US Chamber Foundation found that about 70% of Americans failed a basic civic literacy test, such as identifying the 3 branches of government.
If the president and the vice president died, who would then become president?
The Secretary of State.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No. I'm sorry.
So there's already a gap between what people can read and what government materials demand. But how does that feed into political behavior? Well, as it turns out, a lot. For starters, just as with published books, political speeches are getting shorter and simpler. An analysis of Britain's parliamentary speeches found that they have shrunk by 1/3 in a decade. Another study of Germany's Bundestag found that despite the language's notoriety for its length, there too was observed a clear simplification of the language across the last 30 years.
Ja, Frau Kollegin, ich verstehe Ihr Problem nicht.
And an analysis of almost 250 years of inaugural presidential addresses using the Flesch-Kincaid readability test found that while George Washington's scored 28.7, denoting postgraduate level, Donald Trump's most recent speech came in at 9.4, the reading level of a high schooler. Now, I'm not about to denounce simple writing. And let's be frank, few people have ever wished politicians' speeches to be longer. But when you lose the ability to listen or read complex texts, you also are more likely to lose the ability to develop complex ideas that allow you to see nuance and hold two contradictory thoughts together. Plus, at a more fundamental level, it is important that voters can comprehend and retain political information more reliably. Low literacy makes it harder to decode complex policy texts, news articles, candidate platforms, or legal language. And when you have the majority of the population lacking these critical reading skills, you also have a population that is more vulnerable to scams, misinformation, predatory practices, and shortcuts, such as labels, social media memes, and partisan cues. Take the most recent government shutdown as a prime example.
There is such a staggering amount of gaslighting and false information.
If your social media algorithm is coming from the right, you're likely seeing posts like this from J.D. Vance or Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, suggesting that Democrats not only want to fund healthcare for undocumented immigrants, but do so disproportionately to take advantage of young, pregnant American women. According to the White House, this is outright fact. However, this claim has been found to be categorically false by both independent fact-checkers and healthcare policy experts at the Kaiser Family Foundation and Georgetown University. But seeking out and understanding fact-checkers like these, reading policy papers from academic sources, or at the extreme end of things, digesting the entirety of the government funding bill is outside of the literacy capabilities of the majority of the US population. And whether you are left, center, or right, the reality is that people with low reading skills may be more susceptible to simplistic narratives, emotionally charged framing, or misleading claims, including, by the way, twisting someone's words in a misleading way that removes the context and only serves to flame the fires of division. Now, I'm not going to debate which of the social media posts are worse or the ethics of the political decision-making in today's video. But what these examples illustrate is that in the absence of factual awareness, we see stronger reliance on partisan cues. So we have a plausible pathway from reading hurdles to weaker political knowledge and susceptibility to emotional messaging. But is there empirical support for the decline of democracy? Well, at minimum, there appears to be a strong correlation. Democracy depends on information exchange, reasoned public debate, and a citizen's ability to scrutinize policy. Literacy, especially critical literacy, enables people to read the world and participate as empowered citizens. But when whole groups are effectively excluded from reading-based deliberation, policy debates, or bureaucratic procedures, democracy becomes systematically unequal. Institutions fail to reflect the needs and voices of the least literate. And illiteracy often overlaps with poverty, minority status, rural isolation, or gender disadvantage. Remember that OECD study on literacy that I talked about earlier in this video? Well, adults who grew up in disadvantaged socioeconomic conditions displayed weaker proficiency in all skill domains. Poverty is the biggest predictor of illiteracy. It is why this nexus between the lack of literacy, income, and political knowledge gives credence to populist ideologies that can further undermine democracy. Even though populists will often claim to defend the people or real democracy versus the corrupt elite or the dangerous outsiders, populism thrives on an us versus them narrative, or that independent institutions like the courts or the press are enemies of the people. And since populism treats opponents as enemies rather than legitimate participants in a shared political system, democratic processes weaken.
I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry.
Institutions lose trust, and people start valuing strong voices over a shared dialogue.
You may not like a lot of what the populist nationalist movement stands for, but you'll learn to live with it.
In societies with high illiteracy or low media literacy, those messages spread faster and face less resistance. Now, there is an important caveat here. While yes, there have been many studies which correlate lower education capital with stronger populist attitudes, the relationships are rarely deterministic. Many well-educated people hold populist attitudes, and the direction of causality is debated. Algorithms, echo chambers, social media incentives push simplistic, emotionally laden content regardless of literacy. Plus, industrial decline, globalization, income inequality. All of these things fuel resentment, and disillusionment with institutions often runs deeper than just simple reading ability. But nonetheless, empirical work shows that without effective education and civic learning, democratic institutions may fail to deliver for the poor and become more fragile over time, such as lower trust, lower accountability, and a higher risk of populist manipulation. And while correlation does not equal causation, countries with high literacy rates and equitable access to education are linked to more resilient democracies. So if this connection exists, what can we do? Well, for starters, we can begin by investing in literacy and reading comprehension across age groups, and not just for early schooling. It is important that we teach not just what to read, but how to read critically, including citing sources, framing, and misinformation. We can also simplify ballots, public forums, and government communications to be more accessible. This should go hand in hand with simplifying policy explanations and reducing gatekeeping in order to build trust between people and elected officials. And last but not least, because so much political information travels online, training in digital media scrutiny is vital. Fact-checking habits, and platform literacy, just to name a couple. We've seen that a literacy gap may limit political knowledge, making individuals more vulnerable to emotionally charged or simplistic populist messaging, but literacy is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Economics, media, and identity all intersect. And if democracy depends on an informed citizenry, then helping people read better may be just as vital as any policy reform. What if the next frontier for saving our democracy is in our schools, our libraries, and local communities? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, and if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, and for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!